So this afternoon, what we're going to be working on is writing an equation given the equation's roots. So let's review by solving an equation by factoring. So the first equation I have is x squared plus 5x minus 6 is equal to 0. So remember, to do this, we multiply the first number times the last number, and we get negative 6x squared. So now I want two numbers that multiply to 6 and then minus to give me a 5. And those numbers would be 6 and 1. And when I multiply 6 times 1, I have to get negative 6. But when I add them, I have to get positive 5. So that would be positive 6x and positive 1x. Now I bring down the last number, negative 6, and I bring down the first term, which is x squared. Now I'm going to factor by grouping. I group the first two, and I group the last two. So the GCF of the first two would be x times x plus 6, and the GCF of the last two is 1 times x plus 6. So my two factors are x plus 1 and x plus 6. And remember, that still equals 0. So now I make that t-chart, and I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. So I have x plus 1 equals 0, x plus 6 equals 0, and then I solve for x. So over here on the left side, I get minus 1, I get x is equal to negative 1. Over here I'm minus 6. On the right side, I get x is equal to negative 6. So my roots, or my zeros, are negative 1 and negative 6. Let's take a look at number 2. So same thing, I want to solve this equation, which is 2x squared plus x minus 3 equals 0. And I want to solve this by factoring. So remember, I multiply the first times the last, I get negative 6x squared. Now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 6 minus to give me a 1, because there's really a 1 in front of that x. So those two numbers would be 3 and 2. And when I multiply 3 times 2, I have to get negative 6. But when I add them, I have to get positive 1. So that would be positive 3x and a negative 2x. Bring down negative 3 and bring down the 2x squared. So now I'm going to factor by grouping. I group the first two, I group the last two. Look at the first group, my GCF is x, so I have x times 2x plus 3. And the GCF of my last two would be negative 1 times 2x plus 3. My factors are x minus 1 times 2x plus 3. And remember, that equals 0. I make my t-chart. Set each factor equal to 0. X minus 1 equals 0. 2x plus 3 equals 0. If you recall that I have a 2 in front of that x, so that means that my root over on the right-hand side is going to be a fraction. So let's finish up the left side by adding 1. I get x is equal to 1. And on the left side, I'm going to minus 3. 2x is equal to negative 3. Divide by 2. X is equal to negative 3 halves. All right, so now what we're going to work on is going backwards. So what I want to do is, given the roots, such as negative 1 and negative 6, I want to work backwards. I want to take these roots and come up with this equation up here. Take the roots 1 and negative 3 halves and come up with this equation up at the top. So we are going to work backwards. So I have my roots over here, which is negative 3 and positive 7. So I want to come up with that equation. So the first thing we're going to do, so step 1, so write on your paper, is to set the roots equal to x. So over here I'll have x is equal to negative 3 and x is equal to 7. The next step would be to set equal to 0. So to get the x is equal to negative 3 equal to 0, I have to add 3. So x plus 3 is equal to 0. And on the right one, on minus 7, x minus 7 is equal to 0. My next step I would want to do is to take each one of those, x plus 3 and x minus 7, and set them up as factors. So set up as factors. So I have x plus 3 times x minus 7 equals 0. So once I have my factors set up, to go from a factored part up to an equation would be to multiply or double distribute here. So step 4 would be to multiply. Remember, we are multiplying two binomials together, so we do have to double distribute. Let's start. X times x is x squared. X times negative 7 is negative 7x. 3 times x is 3x. And 3 times negative 7 is negative 21, and that still equals 0. The last thing, step 5, I'm sure you know what that would be. That would be to clean it up and to simplify. So I do have like terms right here, negative 7x and positive 3x. That would be x squared. Negative 7x plus 3x is negative 4x. Minus 21 is equal to 0. And always make sure at the end that you do have it equal to 0. If you don't have it equal to 0, it's only an expression, not an equation. Okay, so now let's take a look at example number 2. I have 3 roots, 0, 4, and 5 halves. So the same thing as before, I'm going to take each one of those roots and set it equal to 0. So x equals 0, x equals 4, and x is equal to 5 halves. So now I'm going to set these all equal to 0. So if you take a look at the first one, that's already set equal to 0, so I don't need to do anything with that. For the second one here, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. So I get x minus 4 is equal to 0. For this one over here with the fraction, what I would do is I would put the x over 1 and cross multiply so that we get 2x is equal to 5, and then subtract 5 from both sides. So we get 2x minus 5 is equal to 0. Now what I'm going to do is take these and set them up as factors. So I'm going to start with the x here and the x minus 4. And then I also have 2x minus 5. And that's still equal to 0. So now I'm going to start by distributing the x here. So I get x times x is x squared, and x times negative 4 is negative 4x. Now I need to multiply this guy here, by 2x minus 5. And that's still equal to 0. So we will double distribute. So x squared times 2x is 2x to the third. X squared times negative 5 is negative 5x squared. Negative 4x times 2x is negative 8x squared. And negative 4x times negative 5 is positive 20x. And so now I'm going to clean up the middle right here by combining like terms. And I get 2x cubed. And then negative 5x squared minus 8x squared is negative 13x squared plus 20x is equal to 0. And that is my final answer. Okay, so let's take a look at number 3. I'm going to take my two factors, 2 plus or minus the square root of 5, and I'm going to set each one equal to x. So I have x is equal to 2 plus the square root of 5. And I have x is equal to 2 minus the square root of 5. And the same thing as before, I want to set these now equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 2 get x minus 2 equals the square root of 5. And now I'm going to subtract the square root of 5. So I get x minus 2 minus the square root of 5 is equal to 0. And now I'm going to work on the other side. Minus 2. X minus 2 equals negative the square root of 5. And add the square root of 5. So I get x minus 2 plus the square root of 5 is equal to 0. So now I'm going to take each of my factors and put them in parentheses. X minus 2 minus the square root of 5 times x minus 2 plus the square root of 5, and that equals 0. So now if you notice, I'm multiplying a trinomial here times another trinomial here. So the best thing to do, I believe, is to not triple distribute because it can get pretty messy. So I'm going to set up the multiplication as an up-down multiplication. So x minus 2 minus the square root of 5. And right underneath it, I'm going to put x minus 2 plus the square root of 5. So now I'm going to multiply the square root of 5, the square root of 5 times negative 2, and the square root of 5 times x. And negative 2 times the square root of 5, negative 2 times 2, and negative 2 times x. And then the same thing with the x times the square root of 5, x times 2, and x times x. So now let's multiply the square root of 5 times negative the square root of 5. And that is going to give me negative the square root of 25. But the square root of 25 is equal to 5. So I'm going to change that to just a negative 5 there. And then I'm going to multiply positive the square root of 5 times negative 2 is negative 2 the square root of 5. And then the square root of 5 times x is x the square root of 5. Now I'm going to start multiplying negative 2 to each of the numbers above it. So I'm going to have negative 2 times negative the square root of 5 is positive 2 the square root of 5. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, so I'm going to put that right beneath the 5, the negative 5. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Now I'm going to start multiplying the x times everything above it. So x times negative the square root of 5 is negative x the square root of 5. X times negative 2 is negative 2x. And x times x is x squared. Now I'm going to add these straight down. So I have negative 5 plus 4 is negative 1. Right here, these will cancel out, become 0 because one's negative and one's positive. Same thing here, x the square root of 5 and negative x the square root of 5, these will cancel out. Negative 2x and negative 2x is negative 4x. And then I'm going to bring down the x squared. And don't forget, this is all equal to 0. So that is it. And I will see you guys on Tuesday.